Alrighty. Awesome. So welcome to From 5 to 50, the podcast dedicated to helping startups and founders survive and thrive through the early stages. I'm your host, Maren Kate, and we are here with Sid Sijbrandij, CEO of GitLab. I'm so excited to chat with you, Sid.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So first off, when did you found GitLab?
So I started a company in 2012. That was 1 year later that my co-founder started GitLab as an open source project. And it really started growing faster after we joined Y Combinator in 2015 with nine people.
Okay. And did you join Y Combinator in San Francisco or somewhere else?
It's only in San Francisco or Mountain View to be exact.
Got it. So in 90 seconds or less, tell our audience the founding story or the why behind GitLab.
So Dimitri had two things he wanted to improve. He didn't have running water in his house, and he didn't have great collaboration software at work.
Jeez.
And he did the one that he didn't need a budget for because he was a developer, and 300 people joined him in that effort. I saw it a year later, and I said, "This is great. I'll start GitLab.com without you." And he was like, "Yeah, that's totally cool. It's open source. Go for it." And a year later, he tweeted out, "I want to work on GitLab full time." And we agreed on a pay. I went to the local Western Union money station, said, "I want to wire some money from the Netherlands and then to the Ukraine." And they said, "Do you know this person, or is this someone you met over the internet?" There's a lot of scams going on. And I made the wire, and that's how we got in business.
And you guys are the only two co-founders, is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome. And so bootstrap, self-funded, or I'm assuming you have investors because of the Y Combinator?
Yeah, so we were self-funded for the first years from 2012 to 2015. And I speculated a bit with Bitcoin, doubled my money, and I put that $100,000 into GitLab.
Okay. And then you took on outside investors in 2015.
Yeah, we did Y Combinator. They give you a bit of money. We raised a seed round of $1.5 million, and we got our A round from Coastal Ventures.
Got it. So why did you decide to make the self-funding for several years? Why did you decide to take on outside investors? What was the thought process behind it?
Well, we were apprehensive. I told my wife before we went out to Y Combinator, I said, "Well, there's a risk of us trying to that will be talked into taking outside money." I said, "Stop me if that happens." And she saw the process which we went through. We didn't want outside money because it means that you have to return it and you have to get to a so-called liquidity event, which means either you sell the company or you IPO. But becoming a public company is very unlikely. So most people end up selling, and that's not something we wanted for the company. Then we tried to recruit people that were good in sales and in marketing, and they all wanted stock options. And I saw what happened if you give options, but it takes 15 years to get to liquidity. That wasn't really the deal. So I want to respect, if we gave option, they'd be worth something. So we had to grow fast. And to grow fast, you need outside money. So we ended up raising money.
And now do you feel comfortable with the idea of either selling or IPOing? Is there one that you lean towards more when you think through it?
Right in 2015, we said, look, we rather not sell. So the aspiration is to become a public company in 2020. And that's still our aspiration.
Awesome. So what's your current size now?
We're 650 people in more than 50 countries, all remote, no offices.
Amazing. And are there any growth numbers you can share, revenue, users, etc.?
So our revenue is over 50 million ARR, and we have over 100,000 organizations using us with millions of users.
That's amazing. I love that you guys are fully remote with no offices. I've always built and enjoyed working completely remotely. So that actually leads me to my next question. When I first reached out to you for the podcast, I was toying with a podcast just focused on remote companies, because since I've been 19, I've worked remotely and built my companies as mostly distributed. When I read your guys' manifesto, I was really excited to chat and understand why you chose remote, and specifically what our audience can learn from when they're thinking through whether they should be co-located or partially or fully remote. Especially, these founders are between 5 and 50 people usually.
Yeah, I think for us, it was really important that people didn't have to come to the office to get the information that's necessary and to get to the job opportunities, the career opportunities that are necessary. So from very early on, we started writing things down. And during Y Combinator, they told us, look, remote works for engineering, but not finance and marketing and sales. So we got an office, and people arrived, like they got hired and they came there for a few times, but after a few days, they stopped showing up because it wasn't needed. They weren't getting any extra information. And they were on Slack, on Zoom, in the Google Docs, in GitLab pages and GitLab issues and GitLab merge requests. And they just didn't need to be there. So I think that's not that people like the commute. It's just that people don't want to miss out. And if you make sure that people don't miss out, you can be remote too. But it takes a lot of effort and focus to make sure you push down, you make sure that all conversations are captured appropriately and that everything is documented. Our handbook now is over 3,000 pages of like, what processes do we have? And if you're going to change something, you change it there first and foremost. It's not an afterthought. It is the way we operate.
How do you guys manage that? Are there like certain permissions? How do you make sure that everyone is on the same page with a 3,000 page handbook?
Yeah, so the nice thing is it's split up per department, so you don't have to read everything. And people can kind of select who they think should make a decision, merge something. And then there's a limited set of people in the company that can merge something, mostly managers and up.
Okay. And then what tool do you use to manage that massive company playbook?
It's GitLab Pages. So it's a static website based on middleman, a static website generator. And then GitLab Pages make sure it gets deployed. And because it's a static website, it's easy to kind of search it and read it.
Got it. Awesome. I like that. Right now, I use just a really large Google Doc, and I think I'm starting to hit the upper limit of that with my company. So that's really good to know. That leads me to the next portion, especially since you mentioned that at Y Combinator, which I've heard before. I lived in San Francisco for 6 years and had a company that was fully remote. And then when we took on venture capital, they were like, well, you have to have an office. And we had the same thing. We had an office, but only a few people would come in. Most of our company were in different places, and everyone seemed to get more done when they were working remotely. But in terms of your investors, how have they kind of dealt with this? One of the things people say often when I talk about remote is, yeah, but you can't really raise venture capital. But you guys, obviously in 2018, as I was looking up, you announced a $100 million round led by, I think, Iconic Capital. So how did that work? Are they very remote friendly, or what did those conversations look like?
They don't like remote. We missed out on investors because we were remote. We have skepticism from investors because we were remote. It gets easier if you get bigger because the assessment switches. In the beginning, they assess your team, then they assess your product, and then they assess your financials. The team, they're like super skeptical. They will be able to create something non-remote. Then when it's about the product, they're like, yeah, maybe, but scaling and this and that. And then when it's about financials, well, you can let the numbers speak for themselves. So it's less of a concern. Mm-hmm. For us, the B round was the hardest one because the A round, we were still we got that office and everything. Yep. And there, August Capital and Vili Ilchev said, look, I don't like this remote thing, but explain to me why it's going to work, which is the first time an investor asked that. And I thought it was very nice to like give us a chance to address it. Yeah. Other investors just said no without looking into it. And we presented, and he was still skeptical. And then one of his associates, Avi said, hey, I've read their handbook. I started reading yesterday and read all through the night. They're the best organized company of their size. They're going to make this work. And he vouched for us, and that sealed the deal. But the problem is, if we were to be acquired, there's probably like a 50% discount, because for the acquiring company, it's so hard to kind of bring people over to their headquarters, etc. We have very few people in the Bay Area. And since an acquisition is the most likely outcome if you raise venture capital, that like depresses the valuation you will get. But people are getting better about it. You can now point to InVision and WordPress and maybe a bit to GitLab and Zapier to point to like it can be done remote.
Absolutely. And I wonder, even in the next 5 to 10 years, will we see investors who are maybe only investing in remote companies? Because, I mean, obviously we're a little biased as that's the way we've worked and the way we've built companies, but I feel like remote cultures often are more results driven. Everything's written down. You can be a lot more organized than if you're co-located, but there is that huge bias. But I do wonder if in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more of a shift.
I certainly think so. And for sure, the limits of the co-location model are getting clear. Investors in San Francisco, they're all battling like, wow, our portfolio companies are getting outbid by Google, by Uber, by Airbnb, for engineering talent. The retention is an enormous problem at all these companies. So they don't like remote yet, but they're starting to sour on the co-located model and all the disadvantages. And they see that remote offers you much easier hiring, scaling. And I think they're going to realize exactly what you say. Remote forces you to do the things you should be doing anyway, but do them sooner.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a forcing function. It's like you don't have an option. I can't just tell my admin, hey, can you do this? I have to write it down. I wonder, I feel like it must be just an old school model where most people, when they were coming up, the way they worked wasn't like this. And it's hard to wrap your mind around. It must be almost like languages, like switching a language. But that is encouraging. And I think it's encouraging to see more remote first companies raise money and do really well, because it starts to lay the foundation that a decade from now, people are going to be like, yeah, this is the obvious, or at least one of the major options, versus you have to be in an office.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I said the earlier rounds are harder. Incubators are the worst. So Y Combinator is an exception. They don't require their companies to kind of get to their offices, but most other incubators require the companies to kind of use their office facilities. And I had a few kind of conversations with them. There's about 2,000 incubators in the world. I only spoke to 2 of them. And I said, like, why are you doing that? Like, the most successful incubator in the world, Y Combinator is not requiring that. Why are you doing that? They're like, well, our investors, the people that pay for it, they want to see the companies there. So they're like running a zoo instead of managing on business outcomes. So I think that attitude is going to change dramatically.
Yeah. And at the end of the day too, there's so much with everything in life, but there's so many biases we don't even realize we have. Like, if you see someone in an office, it makes them more successful. It's not that, it's just kind of a human instinct.
And there's a lot of detrimental things that happen, because some of the best ideas are like the least plausible, like run an illegal taxi service, have people rent out their own home to strangers, or start competing with GitHub. And if you co-locate people, they're gonna have to tell everyone what they do, and they see like people frowning, they're gonna switch to something more plausible. And that's what you want to prevent. And also, most startups fail. Like, an average startup doesn't have the right culture to succeed. So you kind of want that particular culture and a differentiated culture. And if you mix everyone together, you're going to end up with a mix of colors that's going to look pretty drab and gray.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It totally makes me want to like explore the notion of remote first incubators or remote first funds, and see if there's any out there, but also, yeah, that just gets the wheels spinning. So another aspect that I was really impressed with when I was reading about what you guys do and watching some of the talks you've given is the kind of open source business model. And I was thinking in terms of for founders who are in that 5 to 50 stage, what do you wish you'd known about building a more open business and about transparency within your culture?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that. There's the transparency. We did that in the beginning to make sure that the people from the wider community could kind of see what we did as a business, and keep them trusting of and able to correct us when we make mistakes, and that's been very successful. We now every month we have more than 200 contributions coming from the wider community. What we didn't realize that it'd be such a great recruiting tool. The last 3 months, we got more than 20,000 applications.
That's awesome.
Regarding the business model, we have an open core business model where part of our product is open source and part of it is proprietary, and you pay per user per year for it. I think that works if you're making something that is going to be used a lot and you're going to create a lot of value and you're going to capture a low percentage of that value. If you need a higher capture rate, it's probably better to do something completely proprietary. And then we specify that model as being buyer-based open core, where the difference between open source and paid, and even between our different paid tiers, is like, who cares most about the feature? If it's an individual contributor, it will be open source. If it's an executive, it will be in the highest paid tier. And that took us a couple of years to figure out. And that's the thing I would have liked to know a couple of years ago.
Okay, that's actually really good. What's the most successful growth hack you ever tried? And it could be at any stage in your business.
I think we're not the best company in growth hacking. I think open core is an amazing distribution model. Mm-hmm. And that in combination with a great way to kind of install the product quickly and keep it up to date, I think has contributed to the growth and the success of the open source products on which we build.
So it's more the growth angle is actually the product and the way you've kind of inherently built it. That's created the wheel.
Yes, I think so.
Got it. Okay, awesome. So final 3 questions. What is your favorite book or podcast from the last year?
Regarding favorite book, I'm going to be very boring, and it's not of the last year, but every time we have new people and we keep reminding them to read High Output Management. It's the most best management book ever, and like the density of good advice is unlike any other book.
I'm adding that to my list. I feel like I read that like a decade ago when I wasn't focusing, so I'll reread that. And then what business tool could you guys not live without? Specifically, not one that you've built internally, something external that you use.
Zoom. Zoom. I'm on video calls 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and sometimes people make me use something else, and it's such a dreadful experience each and every time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think with the remote thing, one thing that I've taken a lot time to get around to, because I'm more camera shy, is doing the face-to-face. But it makes such a difference in culture, in bonding, doing video calls versus just a phone call. So that's interesting. I feel like several people I've talked to in the last few weeks have said Zoom. Okay, and my last question. So for the founders listening who are kind of in that 5 to 50 stage, what is the best piece of advice you either received at that stage in your company or that you have given other founders?
That's early for us. I'm not sure exactly how many people we were, but we had a quarter where we were totally missing our quarter. I was very worried about that. And I got a great advice from my CEO coach who said, look, nobody's going to be surprised that you miss a quarter here or there. But they want to see is that you understand why that is and what you're going to do about it. So for 2 weeks long, every other day, we had a an hour-long call trying to understand like every nook and cranny of our sales process, all the stages where mistakes were happening, and we made a plan to remedy it. And we had a board meeting, and I didn't once hear like, hey, you should do more or something like that. They saw we were super focused on it. In fact, the only thing they said was, Sid, don't do any crazy things. And they saw I was so focused on it that they were afraid we closed deals at terms that weren't great, which we didn't. But it's as a CEO, it's everyone will expect problems. It's just they want you to understand them and do something about it.
And learn from them, I would imagine. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay.
You'll keep making new problems along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, it was super great chatting with you. Thanks so much for being on and sharing your valuable advice.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And people can find you at, what's your best way to reach you?
Twitter is probably,
or your company.
Twitter for me personally, Twitter is best, SYTSES.
Okay.
For the company, probably Twitter is best too. So that's GitLab.
Nice. You guys have a big Twitter engagement, I've noticed.
It's been great. We got lots of people who are fans and who are pushing 100,000 followers. That'd be great.
That is amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.